Well, everyone, thank you so much for coming out. I'm excited that I get to share tonight. Pathlib is one of my favorite Python modules in the standard library. And honestly, I didn't quite understand it when I came out. It came in Python 3.4, and I remember hearing some fanfare about it and looked at its documentation, but I just didn't understand it. I didn't understand why I would use it. It took a while for me to kind of poke at it, and honestly, the documentation just really got in the way for me to really enjoy it. But I've started messing with it more and more over the last few years, and now it's something that I find indispensable. And like I said, it's my favorite Python standard library module. And I hope that tonight might be a way that you can encourage. Hi, Terry. Hope you'll be encouraged to give this a try. But before we get into Pathlib, in case you don't know me, I thought I might talk a little bit about myself and so you know where I'm coming from. So my name is Chris May. I've been learning Python for over 10 years. I've learned a couple other languages before Python, and maybe a couple since, but like Python is where I feel like I'm at home. I'm amazed at all the things you can do in Python with little effort, and I hope to be able to use it for a long time to come. As a job, my job title is full stack engineer at Markel, the insurance company. And by that, you may think that I do nothing but build websites, and normally I would think so too, but I'm on the what's known as the innovation team at Markel. And essentially what it means is I create tools, sometimes websites, most of the time Python scripts, to get things done for people, to try to remove impediments and empower people to do more. I'm also one of the co-founders of PyRVA, so I'm glad that PyRVA has been going for either 4 or 5 years strong, and mostly thanks to the co-organizers who were running PyRVA with me. It would not exist today if it were up to me. I'm so thankful for Brian and all the other organizers. So get a chance to thank them as well. Also, I have a website, but it has changed its name just recently to everydaysuperpowers.dev. And that's because I'm really been learning a lot about Python, as I said, over 10 years. I'm just excited about empowering others to learn more about Python and to do more things with their lives, to superpower their everyday life. And so there'll be a little bit more about that later, but that's my website. And if you follow me on Twitter, I'm at _Chris May. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about paths. So anytime we want to reference a file or a folder on our operating system in Python, we're going to be dealing with some kind of path. And paths can be quite a number of things, right? I mean, in some cases, it can be pretty simple, right? If we just want to open a file that's in our current directory, it's pretty simple. We just open up a string with whatever name the file is. But it could also be pretty complicated. And, well, at least one thing I want to mention is it can be error prone. So let's just take, for example, this piece of code. Now what this does is it gets the current working directory, of course, assuming that we would have imported os and os.path, but it would get the current working directory, save that to a variable called cwd, and then it'll create another variable called new file, and it'll point it to the, it would essentially take the current working directory and then add /dir/dup to it. And this is perfectly good code. This works. This is the way that you would generally use the os.path module to access files. But I don't know if any of you can notice there's an error in this code. And it's pretty hard to spot because this will actually work a lot of the time. In fact, it could work 100% of the time, but only if you're on OS X or Linux. And that's because this forward slash is trouble. Windows does not like forward slashes. And so if you were to create code that has a forward slash and then you want to access this file in Windows environment, it'll blow up your program. And that's kind of scary. Now, let's talk about how working with paths can also be awkward. In this case, let's get another batch of code up there. This is code that I would write a lot. When I was learning Python, actually probably for the first 6 or 7 years of my time in Python, I was making a lot of Django websites. And something like this ended up at the top of my Django settings file. And that's because, it's a good practice to set a variable that says, hey, this is a folder where everyone else is getting based from. So in this case, like what this code is doing is that it's starting with the current file, and that's what the double underscore file is, creating the absolute path from that, getting its folder name, and then getting its folder name. And as you can tell, that's a lot of code to do that. And on top of that, it's like every, os.path, os.path. Every time I would type this out, it just seemed like I was doing something wrong. It just didn't seem Pythonic to me. It seemed like I was writing a lot of code. And then even then, the function names, os.path, the dir name, or abs.path, when I first was working with it, I wasn't really sure what exactly these did. And on top of that, like in order to know what base dir is, you can't just read it left to right. You have to start inside the most nested parentheses, which in this case is double underscore file, and work your way out. And there's really not much in Python that works that way. I mean, you can do things in Python like that, but it just didn't feel right. And like, honestly, I just felt like time after time, I just kept asking myself, am I doing this wrong? I mean, there must be a better way. And well, now there's, as I said, in Python 3.4, Pathlib joined the standard library. And to speak a little bit about why Pathlib is better than os.path for general use cases, I just want to kind of touch on a couple of things. First is os.path just manipulates strings. To illustrate this, let's just say that we have our, let's say that we would type this into a Python interpreter or a Python REPL. So we get the current working directory, and if you ask, hey, what is CWD? It would print out a string. In my case, it'd be /users/chmay. Now, we were to say use os.path to join the string folder to CWD, we'd get back another string, /users/chmay/folder. This is all expected. And let's just do one more example. So if we were to take CWD and ask for and get its dir name, we would /users, right? Because the dir name is like the directory of whatever. It's like the folder holding the last item in your path. And so this works well, but this also, I think, creates some of the problems we were dealing with. In particular, let's just talk about strings. Strings are too generic for data. And then I'm going to talk about it in this way. Like if we were to have these 3 variables that are pointing to these 3 parts of data, it wouldn't be super useful, because it can be, right? I mean, we see like stuff like this in Python all the time. But normally we would want, when we're working with data, we want something that would kind of convey meaning with it. We want something, we don't want to have to parse a string in order to try to figure out, what data is in it. Like day, we don't want to get the 1, 2, 3, 4, like the 6th and 7th character to figure out what month it is. We want to ask flag day, what month are you? So in Python, if we were to work with this data, I would suggest, chances are, first off, like with person, we would run it through the JSON loads function and create a dictionary out of it. And dictionary is an object, and I think it's better than string. You can say, hey, person, what's your city attribute? And it'll tell us Richmond. Likewise, you could use Python built-in date object. And now we could ask flag day, what day are you? What year are you? What month are you? We can get that information much more easily. So the question is, what do we use with home directory? And of course, if we're using Pathlib, we should use path object, because that'll have so many more things attached to it that we could use. And we'll get to more of that later. But another reason why objects are better than strings is especially if you're on Windows or if you're writing cross-platform code. And to examine, no, to show this, let's go back to that first code that I showed you at the beginning of this talk. If we were to run this code and then ask Python on a Windows machine, what is new file? If we were to say print out new file, we would get this. And of course, as I mentioned, Windows needs a backslash, and in Python, backslashes are used to escape characters in strings, and so that's why we have the double backslashes. But of course, as I mentioned before, that / is trouble. If we were to use new file, the variable new file, to try to access a file, it would blow up and it just wouldn't be good. So I suggest we should use path, the path object from the Pathlib module, to make this work. And so I guess the question is, how exactly can we use path in this situation to make it work? Well, it's actually amazingly easy. So we just do that. And now if we ask Python to print out what new file is, we will get an object that's called Windows path, and it would point to foo.py. And now if you're in Windows, you don't have to worry about these /. As I said, Windows loves backward slashes, and it needs backward slashes. But what's beautiful about Pathlib is that it will take this object and it will turn them into backslashes right when it needs to access the file. This works every time. Now let's talk about that next chunk of code I brought up, because another reason why objects can be better than strings is that it can give us leaner code. So as a reminder, so this sets up a variable called base_dir that is 2 folders up from our current file. It's at like the base directory for our project. And as I mentioned before, like since os.path, all it does is it returns strings. You can't like chain things to it, right? That's why we have os.path.dir name needs another function that's getting called in and another function that's getting called in, because these return strings. So what's nice is with path, we can chain all this together. And there are a number of ways you can do this, but here's one way I suggest you can do this. So in this case, we're just calling path on the current file. So now there's a path object that knows of this file. We're calling resolve on that, and all that does is it resolves any, it essentially returns an absolute path to the file, to the current path. Resolves any symlinks or any kind of relative segments in there. And the point is that it returns the absolute path to the file. And that's needed if you ever want to access anything that's above the current file or above the current path, in like a directory. And then we're calling .parent and .parent. So .parent just holds is the parent element of where your path is. And so I think obviously this is a leaner code, and once you're familiar with it, I think this is a much better way to resolve, to define parents, to do the same thing that we did before. And this works. And this is what's one thing that's great about Path is like we can use Path at least since Python 3.6, you can use a path object and pass it into os.path.join or any of the other os path functions. Anything before that, it'll break. You have to convert it to a string first. But that's one of the beautiful things about Python is like now it's useful everywhere. But another thing that's really nice about the Pathlib module is there's actually another chance to make this a little bit more readable. We can actually just do this. This does the same thing of joining templates to the base_dir path object and making a a path to this. And I know certain people don't really like this as much, but I think what's really nice is that it leaves this up to you and your team to decide how you want to use, how you want to structure your code, and you can have something as readable as this. So just to recap a little bit what we've done so far about the benefits of Path. First, the same code works on every operating system. You don't have to worry about it breaking anymore. And what's probably even better is you don't accidentally ship code that isn't working and not know about it. It can help make your code cleaner, and it can help you type less. And so hopefully these will give you, I hope that these reasons give you some excitement and some desire to try out Path and Pathlib. So if you want to get started with Pathlib, let's figure out how. To get started, all you need to do is do from Pathlib import path. And 99% of the time, this is what you want to do. And the good news about this is, number one, you don't have to use pin to install thing. As I've said before, this is just in the standard library, so it's available to everybody. There are some other classes you may want to use from time to time, but it's pretty rare. Essentially, Path is what you want to use all the time, unless you don't want to touch your operating system. If you want to create a path that, like if you're on a Linux machine and you want to create a Windows path, you would have to import a different class. And I recommend you to the documentation for that, or I can answer questions later. Now we have Path installed and imported rather in our scope. We need to create a path object. One thing that's really nice about Pathlib is there's a lot of flexibility in how to do that. So for example, let's get the current working directory. This is the way I would suggest to do it, and that's to call the CWD method on the path object. This is what's known as a class method, and it'll return a new path with a fully resolved path, absolute path to the current working directory. However, you can also create a path object with dot to represent the current working directory, or create a path object. Now, the issue with these last two options, these last two ways of creating a path object, is that it's not a fully resolved absolute path to the current working directory. All these are just references to the current working directory. So if you want to get something above folder in or move somewhere else in the operating system, you will need to resolve these first. But if you're working from here down, it'll work. Next, I'm going to talk about what I call the expressive syntax of Pathlib, the ability to kind of suit Pathlib, kind of meet your style. And to do that, I will show you a couple ways of doing the exact same thing. In this case, we want to create a path that starts at the current working directory and goes to /foo/sum/path/bar. One way you can do it is create a path object and pass in a bunch of segments, including even if a segment has a slash in it, it'll know what to do with that. Next, you can create a path object with just foo and use the join path method and pass in other path segments. And finally, we can use the slash operator, as I've shown before, and just do foo/sum/path/bar. Next, I want to talk about the convenience of Pathlib. So a lot of times in Python, we want to read a file into memory, but only read one line at a time. And with Pathlib, you can actually do that with its open method. And if this looks kind of like code that you've done before, that's because Pathlib was created to work code you've done before. This open method works just like the open built-in. So if you want to write to a file instead of reading it, you can, in the parentheses after open, you can pass in a W string to write. You can append files. You can read as bytes. All these things work exactly the same as they've been built in. But what's really nice is that sometimes you just want to read the whole contents of a file into memory all at once. And Path has, the path classes have a convenient function to read, in this case, text straight to memory. And there's also a version. So if you have binary, no, not bytes, I'm sorry. If you have a file that are bytes, and you want to pull that into memory, it's a one-liner. It's really nice. Likewise, they have convenience functions to go the other way. If you want to write text to a file, it's that easy. And a similar one for bytes. Next, another thing that I love that is super useful, and I find this to be, this was probably the thing that caused me to go, I really like this module. And that is if you want to work with one type of file. So let's just say that you want to find and iterate over all the JSON files in a folder. Well, you do that like this. This gets current working directory and will create a generator of every JSON file. And what's nice is not only does it work in the current working directory, but you can also use it in every, you call it, what's the word? I'm looking for, recursively in every folder underneath it. That's by using either the rglob method, or you can do the glob method with a ** in front of the */ in front of the argument. So that's just a few of the things about Pathlib. I just want to pass on. There's one more thing. Let's show it. Essentially, the contributors who made the path and the Pathlib module, they essentially just thought this is such a useful way of working with paths that they just took things from OS and os.path and just attached them to the path object. It means you can do like so many things with it, and it's really quite amazing. Just digging into the documentation, it's so long that like I literally will I'll read something that I want to know about, like say path.replace, and just because I'm in the documentation and I can see the functions above and below it, I will stumble upon another function like, oh, I didn't know that was there. This is so useful. And just amazing what you can do with Path. This is just a small, I think I know I cut out several rows from this table just so it could fit on this slide. But I highly suggest you go to the Pathlib documentation at the bottom of the screen and check it out. And finally, if you'd like to know more about Pathlib, as I mentioned, I've changed my website. It's now everydaysuperpowers.dev. And on the resources page, available right now, is the Getting Started with Pathlib field guide. It's a free PDF that I just created because I want people to just, I don't know, get at least somewhat close to excited about Pathlib, to be able to leave behind, joining strings together for paths and just finding something that's like more enjoyable and powerful. I just want to enable people to do that. In addition, I'm also creating a Pathlib cheat sheet that has just a quick reference for all the methods of path objects, so that if you find the documentation a little bit hard to understand, hopefully my cheat sheet will be a great resource for you. And with that, are there any questions? So there are two questions here. I'm looking at our YouTube live stream. There are two questions. One is from, or they're both from Flying Rackets. One is, are there any other direct formats besides text and bytes that are supported for reading and writing, such as JSON, Avro, or Parquet? Essentially, I'm going to say no in that, sort of. The way I think about it is like, with JSON, it could be pretty easy. Or in all three, it could be easy depending on the module that you're using. JSON, you can use the load function to grab a file, load it in memory, and parse it immediately. I've actually been using JSON with Pathlib. Is I use the pathlib.readText method on the path and pass it into JSON loads, which is expecting a string. So I'm not familiar. I've heard of our Avro and Parquet file formats, but as far as, I don't know how the Python, if there are any Python modules, Python library that work with them. So I don't know, like, if they're just expecting a raw file that has like a, if those modules have already figured out how to handle that, or if they interface with Pathlib. I'm not entirely sure. And then the next question is, regarding path.exists, are there methods that differentiate directory versus file versus symbolic linked existence tests? And yeah, there sure is. In fact, I think everybody can still see my screen. So let me, oh, there goes Dash open. So I love this tool. This is Dash. And it allows me to look up things really quickly. And of course, my system is kind of freaking out because I'm streaming through two services right now. Actually, I think I'm just going to do path dot. Let's do this for now. That might help me. Now, what was the question again? It was, are there any methods that differentiate directory versus file versus symbolic link? Oh, existence. Yeah, well, I just realized, like, he mentioned specifically existence. And let me check the documentation on exists first. Because I believe that if path points to a symlink, exists returns whether the symlink points to existing file or directory. So I think that's one part of the answer. But otherwise, so it does take into effect some of those things. Okay, yeah, so I think that's specifically it. But besides, oh man. But besides exists is also, I'm going to do it down here. There is path.isFile, isMount, isSymlink, isDir. So there is a way to check whether or not a path is any of those things. And if you look in my the field guide, not to plug it many times, but there's a way to show, like, if you want to iterate over any folder and just get the files, one of the easiest ways to do it is to use the, essentially like create a list comprehension where it's like f for f in path dot iterdir if f dot is file, and that's hard. I meant, I wish I guess I could pull up. I just realized I could pull up a so like I don't remember. I can't remember if it, well, let's check. Is it iter underscore door? Nope. All right, so there we go. So this shows every file that's in my home directory, and only the files and not the folders. So in case anybody finds that useful. All right. Any other questions? Oh, let's see. I'm not sure about that. I imagine not, but let's see. Yeah. Oh, you mean, I want to say not, it won't, because the backslash is the escape character. And well, and I think because /n is the new line. Oh, interesting. So it does actually seem to work. Yeah, you're right. Oh, right. Darn it. One of these days I'll get the syntax right. Yeah, something tells me it's not. Okay, so you were saying that a second. Yeah, so it's treating it as one thing. Yeah, I imagine. And it makes sense to me because like backslashes are. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. It sure does. And let me pull that back up. So let me think of a way I can make an example of it. So one thing you can do, for example, like one thing. Okay, so one thing that's nice with Path that this might speak a little bit to what you're talking about is like we could do things like foo /.//bur/ I don't know, just make them. I'm just making kind of a. I'll just stop there. And so this is one of those things where like one of the things that's nice about Pathlib, right, is that so we have these dots in here. So and I kind of think about it as like most of the time. Initially, I did do a lot of like say like path, like I would do something like this because to me, like sometimes this would make more sense to me because I know dot means go up a level, and of course I mistyped it, but and file is not defined because I'm in a REPL and not actually in a file, so I could like just do. And in this case, in what I wanted to show about this was that if I do resolve, you know, Path is smart enough to follow all those things and kind of it realizes we're going down in the foo, but we're going back up to current work directory. Then we're going down to bur, and we're coming back up. And even though foo and bur don't exist, it doesn't worry about that once you resolve it. At least in, I think it's Python 3, 4, and above, and maybe on non-OS 10 or on non-Windows. Let me just check with resolve real quick. Because resolve allows you to pass in a keyword called strict, and if it's strict, it'll let's say here, it'll throw a file not found error if it's not a true path. If the path doesn't exist on a system that it's running on. Okay, so it's 3.6. 3.6 is when by default before 3.6 it was always a strict thing. So whenever you would create a path, essentially like whatever I did here, actually it might be smart enough to know like foo .. is the current working directory. But if I were to just do foo/bur, it would blow up in Python 3.5 and before. Now you can do that in safety until you try to access it. I didn't answer your question, William, did I? Okay, good. Any other questions? Oh. Big user, what's that, sorry? Yeah, I feel like it's definitely one of those things where you, on one hand, I say go with your strengths, especially if you're comfortable with Bash and you've got, your shell scripts lined up and you can do some amazing stuff, especially, with the idea that a lot of the Bash scripts do one thing, and so you just chain them together. In fact, I've heard many people suggest that you create Python scripts similar, where you can create like a little tiny Python script that kind of fits in with the Bash, scripts that can just do one little thing, and you can just pipe through it. And then I've heard a lot of people say Bash scripts are great because you can do that, but then you can also in Python, it can essentially do the same thing. Many of the built-in standard libraries are kind of inspired, at least, by a lot of the Bash built-ins and things like that. But as Brian was saying, that you have the ability to do more things with it. You can build upon, and maybe it's a little more readable, especially to those people if you're sharing code with anybody. I know I'm really impressed with a lot of Bash code, but most of the time I have a hard time reading it. Yeah. 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 That's so true. Oh, nice. Somebody asked, how does Pathlib deal with the tilde? And oh, Brian, you answered it. Nice. There is path.home that will create a path to the home directory, but there is also expand user. Let me pull that up real quick. Boy, my system is struggling with all these streams. Thank you. So as you see here, if you have a string that has a tilde in it, you can use expand user and it'll insert the home path for you. So it's very useful. In fact, that's how I was one of the areas that I was disappointed with Path, was because I thought that was the way you had to do it. And then I found out about the path.home class method, and I was like, oh, well, it's nice to put tildes in there, but if I know I want to start with my home directory, that's a little bit more readable, debatable, right? Because if you know what the tilde means, it isn't necessarily more readable, and it is more, you type more. But that's another thing I like about Pathlib, is it gives you the flexibility to do either. Let me see. Eric, I want to thank you. I just saw that you mentioned that anybody who's on Windows, you found an app like Dash that works called Zeal. That's awesome. I don't know that I may have used Zeal briefly. When I'm on my Windows machine at work, I use devdocs.io, which is a web-based version that does very similar things. So in case, if you got Zeal, I'm sure you're happy. But that's awesome. Tosh asks, can you explain the base dir slide again, where the paths are combined using a /? Also, how is pathlib being called in those lines where path isn't explicitly mentioned? All right, so let's go back over here. So if I were to do path.cwd, it'll give me, a path object to my current folder. If I were to do /foo and terminate it like an actual string, it will resolve, or will add foo to the current. It will return a new path object with foo added to it. And what's really cool about this is that the reason this works is because / is the division, the character to use when you're doing a division thing, like 2 divided by 3. And so essentially what pathlib is doing is they're hooking into that function, I think it's the _div method, and overriding that to essentially join paths. Yeah, and so that answers the first question. The second one you mentioned is, how is pathlib being called in those lines where path isn't explicitly mentioned? And I think it's because of whenever you do something with paths. So let's just make a cwd is equal to path, path.cwd. Now when I do this, cwd is a POSIX path. Normally, if we were to do pwd, I know there's no underscore. There we go. So normally, as I mentioned in the talk, one of the weak points with OS and os.path is that it returns a string. One of the strong points, I think, with pathlib is it returns a path object. In this case, it's as soon as you create a path object, it actually converts into an object that's for the type of operating system you're on. So since I'm on a Macintosh, it creates what's called a POSIX path. And so now I can do cwd, .join. Oh, let's just do a new one. Foo is equal to cwd /foo. And what happens is now foo is a POSIX path to my home directory /foo. And so it's great because you can just keep chaining things, and that's why foo.path, parent works, because foo.parent returns a path that has a parent attribute on it. And so I can use my mouse. So when this resolves, it creates a path, and that has a .parent attribute on it as well. And when it returns, that's /users. So it's really, I love that. I keep forgetting the type of, there's when you code like this, there's a certain type of, I think they call it a fluent API or something like that, where if you create a class and each one of its methods returns a new version of that class, it's nice because you can chain all these bits together. So you can then do stuff like that. And it's really expressive and really powerful. Oh, yeah. So let's go. I'm trying to I could just do foo bur baz boom. So I now have this variable long path, which is a path that's pretty long. So I mentioned parent, and what that does is it's a property that returns, the path that contains the path that long parent is. But there's also a parents property, which returns an iterator, or a generator. So that's why you get this, when you do it like this, you just get this kind of unhelpful POSIX path.parents. I guess it's a class or something. I'm not entirely sure. I have to chase it down. So the best thing you can do is just turn it into a list. And it will generate, go up one parent, print it out, go up another parent, another parent, another parent. And if you download the Oh, I'm sorry, pardon me. If you download my field guide, I'll mention another way you can get to the folder that's 2 folders above where you are is doing something like this. And it's not, I feel like you could, you can argue it's not as readable as doing long path.parent.parent. And just to show that. So those are equal, whether you do long path.parent.parent or if you do long path parents 1. And actually, I just realized that I left the list in there. I don't need that. So that's what's equivalent. So you can type less if you want to get the same area, but yeah, you can debate back and forth, and ultimately, I think it's up to you and your team how you want to do it. But I definitely appreciate the doing this way of just using parents 1 to get the folder 2 levels up. Any other questions? Anything that you're confused about or not I didn't explain well? I'd be happy to try to help with some of those. Oh no, audio and video out of sync. Oh no, I bet it's because my computer is 7 years old and I'm streaming to 2 places. Sorry about that. Next time we might just do streaming to 1 or something. We'll figure this out. There you go. Looks like there's GoFundMe. Thank you, Eric. Oh, and also, if you do download my, I'll just pull it up so everybody can see it. If you do download my field guide, and I really want this to be a useful resource for you. So if you have any questions with it about it or anything, I plan on refreshing it and making it stronger. So if there's anything you can see, if you read it and you're like, boy, it would be better if you could do this or that, let me know, because I want to make it better and stronger. Or if there's something I should remove, if there's anything, any way to make it stronger, please let me know, and I'd be very happy to receive constructive criticism to make it better and to refresh it. Hey, look at you. That sounds like a great idea. Thank you, William. No, thank you. Yeah. I think so. Maybe I'll wait and see what SM Rosenberry is typing. Last chance for any questions. Otherwise, we'll cut the stream. And thanks for. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you if you have a question that you don't want streamed down on YouTube, wait another minute or 2. Otherwise. Yeah. Oh, great. That's wow. That's very nice to hear. Thank you, SM Rosenberry. That's wow. That's encouraging to hear. Which also reminds me. Oh, you know what? It just occurred to me that I do have a while ago. I did put out a post that was my new favorite Python module, and part of the reason I did that was I thought it was really a neat, practical way to show, kind of some of the stuff I mentioned in this talk, but I just thought this was incredible. This was another time where when I had a problem at work where I had a folder of JPEGs, but they were all named. They were not named in a way for a human to understand, right? They were named by IDs, and those IDs referenced products that are in a web application somewhere else. And so that application had an API, so I could say, hey, if I give you an ID, can you give me its information? And from that information, I pulled the name and renamed all those JPEGs in like, I don't know. I don't even think. I guess it took a little bit more than a second because I had to hit the API quite a few times. But this, I just thought it was pretty cool that this here was the code that did that essentially. That for it was I just did Python, whatever name this file .py was, and then passed it. Actually, no, I didn't even pass it the image directory. I just had that hard coded here in the script. But I was just so surprised to see like how many useful things there were in a path item to to come in. Oh, dang it! And then my screen jumps to the top of the article. I don't know why, but to be able to work for each JPEG to get its file name, to hit an API to get back the name, and then to rename it. That was really easy and expressive, and I think a lot shorter than using the os.path methods. But anyway, yeah. Uh-huh. That is correct as far as, yes. Yeah, I would say that's correct. That's what, Pathlib or url.join is. However, you could also make the argument that at least on Unix and OS 10 file paths are very URL like. You could like do say relative ones, or instead of like. So actually, since I mentioned it in the talk, why don't I go ahead and of course I'm doing it here when I could just do it in Dash, but one of the other objects you can import is a pure path. And so these three objects here, pure path, pure POSIX path, and pure Windows path, don't interact with the operating system. And so you could, in theory, create a pure path and build the URL as you'd like, turn it into a string, and then pass it into a thing like requests or anything to actually make a request. But yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily that easy, but it could be, honestly, yeah, because I remember. Oh, good. Yeah. And I was actually, I think I was talking, I don't know, I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about Pathlib, and thought that maybe you could use a pure path or pure POSIX path or something like that to do strings in S3, because they are also different than, like a true. Oh, that's right. Yes, because somebody on their team was on a Windows machine, and so like you would have to use like a pure path or a pure POSIX path, one of the two. To yeah, I guess like you would have to import pure POSIX path to do paths in S3 because they require forward slashes. Anyway, don't know if it actually works. They haven't gotten back to me yet, but I imagine it would get you pretty far. Oh, yay. Thanks, Everett and Eric. I agree with you. os.path. I think I've actually read more of the Pathlib documentation just because, out of joy, really, as opposed to the os.path documentation, because I just kept being overwhelmed by all the names and things. Anyway, yeah, I agree with you. os.path is a little bit of a mess. Although OS2, the OS module is a little bit of a mess too, I think, because it, in a way, it's like the place where I feel like in Python, like Python 2, early in Python 2, if they were trying to make something to go in the standard library and they didn't know quite where to put it, I feel like they put it in the OS module. That's true to a certain point. But yeah, indeed. Okay. Well, I think that I'll give it one more chance for any more questions, and I'll stop the stream to YouTube. And since it's a delay there, I'll wait a little bit longer over there. Okay, well, I think I'm going to end YouTube. Hope that